I found out I wasn't invited to Thanksgiving dinner the same way I found out I'd lost my dignity. Quietly, through a text message that didn't even spell my name right. Hey Dan, Mom thinks it's better if you sit this one out. Too crowded this year. Dan. Not Dad. I stared at the screen while the smell of roasted turkey drifted in from the neighbor's house, and for a second, I actually laughed. Because what else do you do when your own daughter disinvites you from a table you built? The same one you refinished by hand when she moved into that house. It wasn't just the dinner. It was what came after. An hour later, I saw the photo. My daughter, her husband, her in-laws, all smiles under a banner that read, "Family First." My chair was empty in the corner of the frame. They'd used the set I'd given them as a wedding gift. The same one I bought after selling my old truck to make her dream day happen. I didn't call. I didn't text back. But I did one thing, and by the time dessert hit their plates, the entire town knew what kind of family they really were. And before I tell you what happened next, help me reach 1,000 subscribers by hitting that subscribe button. It truly helps me share more stories like this one, full of family, betrayal, and justice you won't believe. Thank you, truly, for your support. The night before Thanksgiving was always my favorite. It used to mean laughter from the kitchen, the clinking of dishes, the smell of cinnamon and roasted butter drifting through the house. This year, the only sound was the hum of my refrigerator and the occasional crack from the baseboard heater. The silence wasn't new. It had just become harder to pretend it didn't hurt. I sat at the small table by the window, the one that used to fit 4 chairs, but now only needed 1. The glow from the neighbor's window poured across the yard. I could see them setting the table, 3 generations moving in rhythm. Grandkids running around, someone checking the oven, a man carving a turkey too early. Ordinary joy. The kind of noise I used to live for. My phone lay face down beside the empty plate I'd set out of habit. I didn't expect a call. I'd stopped expecting anything from family years ago. Still, the weight of that message, "Sit this one out," sat heavy on my chest, like a brick I couldn't lift. I told myself it wasn't personal. Maybe they really were crowded. Maybe the house felt too small with her husband's parents visiting again. Maybe they'd tell me next week that it was all a misunderstanding, but I knew better. You can feel when you've been erased. It's not loud. It's quiet, like a door clicking shut in a house you helped build. Her name is Emily, my only daughter. When her mother died 10 years ago, I promised I'd give Emily everything her mom would have wanted for her. Stability, education, a good start. I sold half my business to cover her tuition when her scholarships didn't stretch far enough. I never once asked her to pay me back. I just said, "Make something of yourself. That'll be enough." She did make something of herself. New house, new career, new family. Somewhere along the way, I became a reminder of a life she'd outgrown. The blue-collar dad who still wore flannel to Sunday dinners and asked too many questions about budgets. Her husband, Matthew, tolerated me the way people tolerate weak coffee. Polite, but only for a few sips. He liked to call me old school. It wasn't a compliment. Last Thanksgiving, I showed up with a homemade pumpkin pie and a bottle of red I'd been saving since her graduation. Matthew smiled the kind of smile that never reached his eyes and said, "Oh, you didn't have to bring anything, Dan." Dan. Again, not Dad. He said it like it was a habit he didn't even try to break. That was the first crack. After dinner, I noticed how every story I told seemed to make the room a little tighter. Emily laughed, but her eyes wandered. Matthew's mother kept asking if I still worked with my hands. I told her yes, and she smiled in that pitying way people do when they've already filed you under less than. I remember driving home that night in the rain, thinking it was just me being sensitive. I told myself love changes, that kids grow distant, that I should be grateful she invited me at all. But gratitude isn't the same as belonging. You can't survive long on scraps of affection. This year, the text proved it. Too crowded this year. That house had 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, and a backyard the size of a baseball field. Too crowded was just polite code for we don't want you here. I poured myself a glass of water and tried to eat something. The turkey sandwich I'd made sat untouched. My appetite had left hours before. I kept thinking about how it happened, how slowly people erase you. It's never one big moment. It's 1,000 little silences stacked like bricks until you realize you're outside the wall looking in. The next morning, I woke early out of habit. I used to get up before dawn on Thanksgiving to start the smoker for the turkey. My wife loved the smell, said it made the house feel alive. Now it was just another quiet Thursday, the calendar reminding me what day it was so I wouldn't forget. I brewed coffee and stood by the window, watching frost bloom across the glass. Across the street, cars began to pull into driveways, families arriving, arms full of casseroles and pies. Their laughter reached me even through the glass. It was cheerful, innocent, and cruel in the way that happiness can be, when it reminds you of what you've lost. At 9, my phone buzzed once. A new photo notification, Emily's post. So thankful for my beautiful family today. I tapped it open. There they were, all seated around the table I'd built. Her husband carving the turkey. Her stepmother-in-law saying grace, my daughter leaning into the man who taught her to see me as an embarrassment. And at the far end, an empty chair. Mine. I stared at that photo for a long time. The kind of stare where your heartbeat starts to sync with the clock on the wall. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger would have meant I still expected something from them. What I felt was closer to clarity. It's strange how humiliation can clear your vision, strip away the fog of excuses you tell yourself to survive. I took a long sip of coffee, then walked to the drawer in my study. Inside was a small wooden box. Inside that box, a letter from my late wife written years ago, before Emily's wedding. She'd written, "If love ever turns into pride, remind her where she came from. Gently, if you can. Firmly, if you must." I ran my thumb over her handwriting. Firmly, if you must. Outside, the neighbor's family began their feast. Laughter echoed across the yards, muffled but warm. I set the letter down and opened my laptop. I hadn't planned to do anything, not yet. But something inside me, maybe Maria's voice, maybe my own breaking point, whispered that sometimes silence is just the space you need before speaking the truth. Tomorrow, I decided, wouldn't be about revenge. It would be about remembering who I was before they made me forget. And maybe, just maybe, reminding them too. The next day came with the kind of stillness that only follows humiliation. I woke up before the sun, the air cold enough to sting my hands as I rinsed the coffee pot. Outside, the neighborhood looked washed clean by frost, and for a brief moment, I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe that message, that photo, that ache in my chest were just another bad dream that clung to me overnight. But when I checked my phone, her post was still there, glowing under the words, "So thankful." I wasn't angry. Not yet. I spent the morning doing what I always did when life pressed too close. Cleaning. I scrubbed the kitchen counters, polished the same silverware I used to bring to their dinners, and vacuumed the living room until the lines in the carpet were perfectly straight. There's a strange comfort in order when the people you love make your world so uneven. It was almost noon when I heard the knock. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, there she was. Emily. My daughter, standing on the porch like she'd forgotten what door she was knocking on. Her hair was tied back, her eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, and in her hands was a paper bag from the bakery I used to take her to as a child. "Hey," she said softly. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She moved past me like a guest in a stranger's house, careful not to touch anything. The smell of cinnamon rolls filled the air, but it only made the silence heavier. "You didn't answer my texts," she said finally. You didn't invite me to Thanksgiving? I replied. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The truth sat plainly between us. She looked away, pretending to study the family photos on the wall. Dad, it wasn't like that. It was complicated. You know how Matthew's parents are. They wanted something smaller, more formal. I didn't mean to hurt you. Smaller, I repeated, but big enough for 20 people. Her shoulders sank. She didn't deny it. I shouldn't have let it happen that way. She hesitated. Actually, I came to talk about something else. There it was. The shift. The way her tone changed from regret to calculation. I'd heard it before. When she was 16 and needed money for a school trip. When she was 25 and the wedding bills ran over budget. When she was 30 and wanted help with the down payment. Each time she started with, I came to talk about something else. Matthew's company is going through a rough patch, she began. It's just temporary, but he needs some liquidity to cover a new investment. He says it's a great opportunity, just needs a small bridge loan. We thought you might help, just for a few months. The words fell one by one, clean and practiced. I could almost hear Matthew's voice shaping them before she spoke. How much? I asked. 50,000, she said quickly, like pulling off a bandage. You'd get it back with interest. It's not charity, Dad. It's business. I almost laughed. Business. That was what family meant to them now. An exchange ledger. You want me to lend your husband $50,000, I said slowly. The same week I wasn't welcome at your table. She flinched, and for a moment I saw the little girl again. The one who used to sit on the counter watching me cook, swinging her legs and asking when the pie would be ready. Then she blinked, and she was someone else. Someone who had learned to keep her face still when she lied. Dad, please, she said. It's not personal. It's just a bad time to ask the banks. You've always believed in us. Believed, I said quietly. That's past tense. She sighed. Matthew said you'd react like this. He said your pride would get in the way. Pride, I echoed. That's a funny word for a man who lets his father-in-law pay for his lifestyle. Don't do this, she whispered. You're making it sound ugly. It already is, I said. She looked at me then. Really looked. And for the first time, there was something like fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of what my silence might mean. Because silence from me had always meant consent. Please, Dad, she said again, her voice softening. You don't understand how hard he's working. The deal could change our lives. Whose lives? I asked. Because mine doesn't seem to be part of that equation anymore. She pressed her lips together, frustrated. Why are you being so cold? You're not usually like this. I leaned back in my chair, watching her. You ever notice how easy it is to mistake kindness for weakness? You've been mistaking me for weak your whole life, Emily. Maybe that's my fault. She looked down at her hands. The silence stretched between us, heavy and long. I could have ended it. I could have given in, written the check, told myself it was what family did. I'd done it before. Every time she needed help, I told myself love was measured in sacrifice. But love without respect is just servitude dressed in sentiment. I can't, I said finally. She lifted her head sharply. Can't or won't. Both. She stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. So that's it? You're just going to turn your back on me? I smiled faintly. No, Emily. You turned yours last week. Her jaw clenched. Matthew was right. You love control more than you love people. And he loves my money more than he loves honesty. She stood, angry now, the sweetness gone. You'll regret this, she said. When you're alone on Christmas, when no one's there to check on you, you'll remember you pushed us away. I already remember who pushed first, I said quietly. She grabbed her bag, her movements sharp, mechanical. Goodbye, Dad. She left the cinnamon rolls on the table. The door closed behind her with a soft click that echoed longer than it should have. I sat there for a while, staring at the bag. The smell filled the room again, sweet and heavy. It was the scent of childhood, of forgiveness baked into sugar and flour. I wanted to throw them away. Instead, I opened the bag, took one out, and placed it on a plate. It tasted exactly like I remembered. Soft, warm, and sad. When I finished, I wiped my hands, went to the study, and opened my laptop. $50,000 wasn't what they needed. What they needed was perspective, and maybe it was time I stopped giving them comfort and started giving them truth. I opened a new document and began typing. Not a letter, not a confrontation, just a record. Dates, payments, receipts, every loan, every favor, every time I'd said yes when I should have said no. I didn't know yet what I was building, but it felt necessary. It felt like the beginning of something solid, something mine. Outside, the world kept moving. Cars passed, children played. Somewhere, a bell rang from the church down the street, calling people to gather, to give thanks. I closed my eyes for a moment and listened. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt awake. I didn't rush. That was the first decision I made. When you rush, you give people the chance to say you acted out of temper. When you breathe, you turn a bruise into a boundary. I printed the ledger I'd started, 3 pages of dates and amounts that looked like a small river feeding a lake that never filled. Tuition gap my scholarship didn't cover. Wedding balance when the venue upgraded them without asking. Emergency dental, down payment float, holiday flights, a refrigerator they swore they'd pay off in 6 months. I didn't write any commentary beside the numbers. Numbers speak plainly if you let them. I added one more item to the list. Not a payment. A question. What did I actually want? Not from them. From myself. If the answer was revenge, I'd already lost. If it was respect, then the path had to be clean. No shouting. No spectacle for its own sake. Justice doesn't need applause. It just needs light. I called my attorney, the same one who helped me set up a modest living trust after Maria died. Her name is Lila. She's patient and precise. The kind of person who reads every footnote and remembers birthdays she never met. She picked up on the second ring and listened without interrupting while I told her a version of the story that left out the humiliations and stayed with the facts. When I finished, she asked one question. What outcome would feel like peace? I said I wanted to stop feeding an appetite that called itself love. I told her I wanted whatever I still had to give to make sense in the world. If my daughter couldn't treat help like a gift instead of a right, maybe I should stop offering it to her and start offering it to people who still knew the difference. I could hear her nodding through the line. You want to reassign intention, she said. That's the cleanest kind of justice there is. We made an appointment for the next morning. I hung up and stared at the ledger again, then opened the wooden box in my desk and slid Maria's letter on top of it. Firmly, if you must. The words looked less like a warning and more like a blessing. That evening, I took a walk around the neighborhood. Porches were still littered with paper turkeys and hand-traced feathers, the last thin decorations before the full lights of December. A few houses glowed with early strings of white bulbs. One yard held a deflated inflatable pilgrim face down in the grass, like a tired clown after work. The air smelled like wood smoke and cold earth. I passed the little church on Maple where we used to leave canned goods every November. The sign out front read, Friends Giving Community Potluck Sunday, all welcome. I stood under the sign longer than I meant to, reading the time over and over. All welcome. 2 words that can warm a life. 2 words that can break one when they're withheld. When I got home, I called the church office. A woman named Ruth answered. She ran through logistics like she had a list in front of her, and maybe she did. I told her I'd like to donate, but quietly, and asked whether they still gave out grocery cards to seniors who were spending the holidays alone. She said they did, but the fund was thin this year. I told her I'd see what I could do, and thanked her for the work she did. She sounded surprised to be thanked, which told me she did more of it than people noticed. I slept well for the first time in a week. Not because anything was fixed, but because my hands had finally found something to hold that wasn't grief. In Lila's office the next morning, the air smelled like paper and lemon oil. She wore a navy sweater and had a legal pad already labeled with my name. I told her about the ledger. I told her about the text. I told her about the $50,000 ask that arrived wrapped in bakery paper and regret. She took notes, her pen tracking like a metronome, steady and patient. "Here's what I'm thinking," she said when I finished. "You'd planned a legacy for Emily. Not just money, but the idea of it. You can keep the intention and change the destination. Create a dedicated fund in Maria's name. Criteria that means something to you. Seniors without family nearby, single parents who work holidays, and if you still want room for Emily someday, tie it to behavior, not blood. A path back that requires nothing more than honesty and repair." I sat there, the words filing into place like furniture in an empty room. A fund, not as a punishment, as a promise kept to the right people. Maria loved feeding people. She loved watching their faces go from stiff to soft in the time it took to pass a plate. If love ever turns into pride, remind her where she came from. Gently, if you can. Firmly, if you must. Lila slid a draft across the table. "We can do this cleanly. Name you as the initial trustee. Appoint a small board later if you like. Maybe someone from the church, someone from the senior center, someone with no ties to your family. Make it clear that assistance is given without publicity unless the recipient chooses otherwise. But if you need a public moment, it should be truthful and necessary. You don't owe anyone spectacle. You owe yourself clarity." I smiled. "I don't want spectacle. I want air." We spent 2 hours building the skeleton, the Maria's Table Fund. The name arrived without effort and sat there like it had been waiting for a chair. We outlined 3 grant types: holiday meal cards for seniors alone, emergency childcare support for single parents working on holiday shifts, and small grants for community kitchens that host anyone who shows up. No questions asked. The fund would begin with an amount I had once quietly earmarked as a cushion for Emily's future. I realized I'd been holding that cushion over a cliff and calling it hope. Now it finally had a floor. Lila looked up near the end. "Do you want Emily to know right away?" "Not yet," I said. "I want to do this first because it's right, not because it hurts. If it hurts, that's on her. But I won't aim for pain. She's had enough of that from life, even if she doesn't act like it." When I left, the cold felt sharper and kinder. I stopped by the bank to open the dedicated account. The woman at the desk asked if it was a business or personal fund. I told her it was a table. She laughed until she realized I meant it, then smiled the kind of smile people give when they recognize a good use for money. At home, I pulled my old camera from the hallway closet and charged the battery. Not for them. For me. I took photos of the ledger pages, of Maria's letter, of the blank envelopes I laid out in a row on the desk. I wasn't documenting pain. I was documenting a choice. In the afternoon, I drove to the church and met Ruth in the fellowship hall. The place smelled like coffee and powdered sugar. Folding tables leaned against the wall. A few teenagers stacked chairs, while a man in a plaid shirt taped a paper banner that said, "Everyone eats." Ruth was shorter than her voice. She shook my hand like I was her equal in some quiet army. We walked through how the grocery cards worked. She showed me a small lockbox where they kept the gift cards and old receipts. I asked her if she ever ran into families who didn't need money as much as they needed a table. "All the time," she said. "Money fills a belly. A table saves a person. You can't buy the second with the first, but the first helps us build the second." I handed her an envelope from my coat. It held the first transfer confirmation and a short letter explaining Maria's table and why it existed. She read it slowly, her mouth tightening once at the mention of spending the holiday alone. She put the letter back in the envelope like it was fragile. "We'll put this to work quietly," she said. "But if you ever need the quiet to end, we can help with that too. Truth has a way of making noise even when you whisper it." On my way out, I noticed a corkboard covered in Polaroids, people holding paper plates, kids with frosting on their faces, an old man playing a cheap guitar. In the corner, a handwritten note: "Take what you need, leave what you can." I stood there long enough that Ruth touched my elbow to make sure I was all right. I told her I was. At dusk, I stopped at the bakery Emily had visited. The girl behind the counter couldn't have been older than 19. She had ink on her fingers and flour on her sleeve. I ordered a dozen cinnamon rolls and a tray of plain rolls. "Holiday special?" she asked. "Kind of," I said. She boxed them with careful hands like she was tucking in children. Back home, I set one cinnamon roll on a small plate and left the rest for tomorrow's potluck. I ate slowly, not because I was savoring it, but because slowness felt like the right kind of power. I cleaned the plate, washed my hands, and dialed a number I should have called years ago. Matthew answered on the fourth ring. His voice had the clipped patience people save for customer service. I told him I'd thought about his request. I told him the answer was no. Then I told him something else. "There's a new fund in town," I said. "It's named after my wife. It feeds people without tables. It won't be lending money to companies, but it will be feeding your neighbors. If you're looking for a way to impress investors, you might consider donating. It would be good for your deck." He didn't speak for a full 5 seconds. When he did, the warmth in his voice had frozen solid. "You're going to make a spectacle of us," he said. "No," I said. "I'm going to make dinner." He tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "You know people talk," he said. "They'll connect the dots." "If they have to connect them," I said, "that's their work, not mine." He hung up first. I stood with the phone in my hand a moment longer, listening to the absence of his voice. It sounded like relief. That night, I sealed 3 envelopes, one for Lila, confirming the first distribution and my intent to make the fund permanent. One for Ruth, with a list of seniors on my block who might appreciate a phone call and a card. One with my name on it, addressed to Emily. I didn't write inside. Not yet. The envelope itself felt like enough for now, a shape waiting to be filled by the right words, not the first ones. On Sunday, I would carry bread into a room where no one asked who I was to belong. I would place it on a table and watch strangers become less strange over steam and gratitude. And if certain people saw the flyer or heard a name and recognized the story behind it, that would be between them and their conscience. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the doorway, looking at the plate drying on the rack, the camera charging on the counter. The 3 envelopes lined like small doors waiting to be opened. The house was still, but it didn't feel empty. I didn't know exactly what would happen next. I just knew where it would happen. Under a banner that said "Everyone Eats," where my wife's name could mean what it always meant when she said it. "Sit, there's room." By Sunday, word had already started to spread in the quiet way news travels through small towns. Not loud, just steady, like wind under a door. The flyer Ruth printed for the community potluck carried more than the promise of food. It carried a name. Maria's Table. People noticed the name before they noticed mine, and that was exactly how I wanted it. I woke early, showered, and pressed the same navy shirt I'd worn to Emily's graduation years ago. The one Maria had chosen for me. She said blue made me look trustworthy. I wasn't sure I still deserved that word, but I wanted to earn it again. When I stepped outside, the air had that thin November brightness that makes everything sharper. The trees bare, the pavement slick, the sound of my shoes loud in the morning stillness. I loaded the trays of rolls into the truck and drove toward Maple Street. The fellowship hall was already alive. The smell hit me before I even opened the door. Roasted chicken, sweet potatoes, coffee. Inside, volunteers moved in practiced chaos, greeting each other with easy laughter. Ruth waved me over and pointed to a long table covered in foil pans. I set down my food and helped pour cider into paper cups. No one asked where I came from. No one looked at me like I didn't belong. That alone felt like healing. Halfway through, Ruth introduced me to a local reporter, a young man with a press badge that looked borrowed. He said he was writing a piece about community projects born during the holidays. "Can we mention the fund?" he asked. "It's such a good story." I hesitated. Attention was dangerous territory. It could twist truth into spectacle. But then I thought of what Lila said. Truth doesn't need hiding. "You can mention it," I said. "Just tell them it's named after someone who believed everyone should have a seat." He smiled. "That's beautiful, sir. What's your last name?" "Flores," I said. "Like the flowers she used to plant." That night, after the tables were cleared and the laughter faded, I returned home to find my porch light flickering again. I made a mental note to replace the bulb. When I checked my phone, there were 3 missed calls from Matthew. I didn't answer. But the next morning, a new message appeared. From Emily. "Dad," she wrote. "I saw something online about a fund in Mom's name. Did you do that? People are talking." I stared at the text, reread it twice. She didn't ask how I was. She asked if it was me. Maybe that was her version of reaching out. I typed slowly. "Yes. It's called Maria's Table. We serve people who need food and company." She replied almost immediately. "You could have told me. You could have invited me," I thought, but didn't write. Instead, I said, "It wasn't about telling. It was about doing." The typing bubbles appeared, then stopped. A minute later, another text arrived. "Matthew's upset. He thinks this makes us look bad." I exhaled, let my jaw unclench. It wasn't a surprise, but seeing it in writing crystallized everything I'd already known. I wrote back, "Tell Matthew that feeding hungry people can't make anyone look bad, only guilty." This time, there was no reply. That afternoon, I stopped by the church again to drop off some leftover rolls. Ruth met me at the door with an envelope. "The paper called," she said. "They're printing a short piece tomorrow. Don't worry, it's respectful. The reporter mentioned how your wife's name reminded him of home." I thanked her and walked back to the truck. The city was quieter than usual, the lull between Thanksgiving and Christmas when everyone resets their cheer. I drove by Emily's neighborhood without meaning to. The house looked smaller than I remembered, though maybe that was just perspective. There were no cars in the driveway, no lights in the windows. For a moment, I wondered if they were inside, reading the same article before it even printed. By evening, the call finally came. I let it ring twice before answering. "What the hell did you do?" Matthew's voice was tight, controlled anger barely wrapped in civility. "You went to the papers? You made a whole show out of some charity project just to humiliate us?" "I didn't mention you," I said evenly. "You didn't have to," he snapped. "People can add things up, Dan. They know who Maria was. They know who her daughter is. They know where the money came from." "That's not my fault," I said. "That's math." He laughed, short, ugly. "You think this makes you some kind of hero? You think turning yourself into a saint erases what you did to your own family?" "I didn't do anything to my family," I said. "I just stopped pretending we were one." There was a pause. I could almost hear him pacing. "You'll regret this," he said finally. "You've made powerful people look stupid." "Powerful people don't look stupid," I said. "They act that way." He hung up, but this time I didn't feel the usual rush of adrenaline that follows confrontation. Only quiet. The kind of quiet that means a page has turned. The next day, I walked into the hardware store to finally buy that porch light bulb. The man at the counter looked up, smiled, and said, "Hey, you're the guy from the paper. The table fund, right? That was something." I nodded. "It's not much." "It's enough," he said. "You'd be surprised what a meal can fix." When I got home, the mail was waiting. One envelope from Lila with updated trust paperwork, and another without a return address. I opened the anonymous one first. Inside was a check for $200 and a note in shaky handwriting. For Maria's table. From someone who knows what it's like to eat alone. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same spot where I'd eaten that cold sandwich after Emily left. The afternoon light stretched long across the floor. I realized this was what Maria had meant by gently, if you can. The firmness could wait. But that night, the firmness came anyway. At 7:30, a knock rattled the door. When I opened it, Emily stood there clutching the newspaper. Her eyes were red, her hair wine-tangled. "You embarrassed us," she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was hurt, raw. "You could have told me before everyone else knew." I gestured toward the table. "I tried to tell you for years, Emily. You just didn't like what I was saying." "This isn't fair," she said. "You made it look like we abandoned you." I looked at her carefully. "Didn't you?" She started to answer but stopped. For the first time, the silence wasn't mine. It was hers. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she said finally. "Matthew said you were trying to teach us a lesson." "Maybe I was," I said, "but not the one you think." Her hands trembled around the folded paper. "Everyone keeps asking questions." His boss saw the article. "You don't know what this could do." "Maybe it'll make him think before he asks anyone's father for another $50,000, I said. She exhaled, half a sob, half surrender. "You really hate him, don't you?" "I don't hate anyone," I said. "I just stopped loving people who mistake kindness for permission." She sank into the chair, eyes shining. "I don't know how to fix this." "You start by telling the truth," I said. "About what you took, what you ignored, and who you decided wasn't good enough for your table." Her gaze fell to the envelope from Lila sitting near my elbow. I turned it over so she couldn't see the name. "This isn't about punishment," I said. "It's about peace. I found mine. You'll find yours when you stop pretending." She nodded slowly, tears tracing clean lines down her face. "I just wanted you to be proud of me." "I was," I said. "I just wish you'd wanted to be proud of yourself." When she left, the air felt lighter. Outside, the streetlights came on one by one, and for a second, I thought I saw Maria's reflection in the window. Calm, approving, patient as ever. The first part of the storm had passed, but storms have a way of circling back when truth starts to travel. The next morning broke with a gray, heavy sky that felt like wet wool. It fit the mood perfectly, soft, suffocating, and still holding something unshed. I made coffee and stood by the window, watching the neighbor's flag hang limp in the damp air. The newspaper hadn't yet arrived, but I didn't need to read it. I could already feel the ripple from what had been printed. By 8, the calls began. Not from Emily this time, but from numbers I didn't recognize. People from town, some polite, some curious, some just wanting to talk. A man said his mother ate at the church and cried when she learned whose name was on the boxes. A woman said she remembered Maria from years ago, how she'd helped clean up after a flood without ever asking for thanks. None of them mentioned Emily or Matthew. They talked about Maria, about food, about kindness. It reminded me that sometimes stories find their own audience, no matter who tries to stop them. "At noon," Lila called. "You've caused a stir," she said, half smiling in her tone. "A good one. But you should know there's also noise. Your son-in-law's been calling the firm, threatening to review your financial dealings." "Let him review," I said. "He'll find receipts. That's all I've ever had." She hesitated. "Dennis, you know I can handle it. But I think they're panicking. He's worried this story will stick to him." "It already has," I said quietly. "The ink's dry." That night, the sky finally broke open. Rain fell in hard diagonal lines, the kind that make you feel safer indoors. I was reading when headlights cut across my wall. The car stopped in front of the house, engine running. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Some things you just feel in your bones. The pounding on the door came next. Sharp, furious. I opened it to find Matthew standing on the porch, soaked, wild-eyed. His tie was loosened, his voice already shaking with anger. "You think this is funny?" he said. "You think humiliating me in front of half the city makes you a hero?" "I didn't mention your name," I said. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell rain and expensive whiskey. "You didn't have to. They all know who you are. They all know who I'm married to. You painted us as parasites." "I just told the truth," I said. "The rest painted itself." He jabbed a finger at my chest. "You ruined us." "No," I said, steady. "You did that when you built a life on loans you never intended to repay." He laughed once, bitter. "You think anyone believes that? You're just some old man with a martyr complex. You'll die alone, surrounded by receipts and guilt." I could have shouted. I could have slammed the door. Instead, I looked at him, really looked, and saw what Maria used to call the look of a cornered man. Anger covering fear, pride covering shame. It almost made me pity him. Almost. "Go home, Matthew," I said quietly. "You're wet, you're drunk, and this won't end the way you think." "You're not my father," he said. "Exactly," I replied, and closed the door. He kicked it once, hard enough to rattle the frame, then stomped off into the storm. Through the curtains, I watched his car slide away, its taillights disappearing like two small fires in the rain. I waited a long time before moving, the echo of his words settling somewhere behind my ribs. "You'll die alone." He said it like a curse. I heard it like a challenge. The next morning, I walked to the church early. The air was clean after the storm, the streets washed bright. Ruth was there already, sorting donation boxes. She looked up and smiled. "You just missed it," she said. "We got a letter, anonymous donor. Said they wanted to match whatever you put in this month." She handed me the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $5,000. I didn't need to guess. People give guilt strange disguises. By midweek, the article had found its way online. Comments poured in, some kind, some cruel, most curious. I tried not to read them, but one caught my eye. "Real family feeds the hungry, not their egos." It stayed with me all day. That evening, as I was sorting mail, the doorbell rang again. I almost ignored it. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Matthew. It was Emily. She looked smaller somehow. The kind of small that comes from losing something you can't name. She held a folder in her hands. "Dad," she said quietly, "I came to show you something." She sat at the table and opened the folder. Inside were papers, bank statements, business records, emails. "I didn't know," she said, "about the loans Matthew took out in my name, about the credit cards he opened. He said you'd cut us off out of spite, that you didn't care if we lost everything." She took a shaky breath. "He lied to me. About everything. We're being audited. The company's collapsing. I could lose the house." I looked at her. Not angry, not triumphant. Just tired. "You have to decide if losing him is worse than losing yourself," I said. Her hands trembled. "I don't even know who I am anymore." "You're my daughter," I said. "That's a start. The rest you'll build from there." She nodded slowly, eyes wet. "I don't deserve your help." "Maybe not," I said softly. "But you have it anyway." I told her about the fund, about the community dinners, about how Maria's name now fed people who'd been forgotten. She listened, silent, her fingers tracing the edge of the folder. "Can I help?" she asked finally. "Not yet," I said. "When you do, it won't be to fix guilt. It'll be to serve someone who'll never know your name. That's when it'll mean something." She stood, tears falling freely now. "I'm sorry, Dad. For everything." "I know," I said. "Now go home and start being honest. That's the only debt I want you to pay." After she left, I sat at the table again, the same one I'd eaten alone at on Thanksgiving. The house was still quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. I looked at the folder she'd left behind. evidence of his lies, her awakening. For the first time in years, I realized silence could be a mercy, not a punishment. I didn't need to call anyone to announce what had happened. The truth was already walking through the world on its own legs. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. Somewhere, a child laughed. Somewhere else, a door opened, letting in the smell of dinner. And in that small sound, that simple human noise, I heard something I hadn't heard in a long time. Peace on its way back home. 3 days later, the article stopped being just a local story. It hit one of those regional human interest pages online, the kind that blends heartache with hope. The headline read, "A father rebuilds Thanksgiving, one table at a time." The photo showed Ruth handing out plates in the fellowship hall, a string of paper turkeys behind her. In the caption, my wife's name was spelled correctly. That mattered. By noon, my phone was full of messages from people I didn't know. Some wanted to donate, some wanted to volunteer, and a few wanted to tell me their own stories about being left out of family tables. The ones that began, "I thought I was the only one," hit hardest. I answered every one of them. Not with speeches, just with thanks. Silence isn't weakness, but sometimes words are work, and this work mattered. Then the email came from a reporter in Seattle. He wanted to do a segment for a Sunday news feature, a story about dignity, redemption, and how kindness can heal humiliation. I hesitated. I didn't want fame. But Ruth said, "If you want Maria's table to live longer than us, let people see it." So I agreed. On one condition: it had to stay about the table, not about me. They filmed 2 days later. A small crew, polite, careful. They recorded shots of volunteers cooking, of me helping load boxes, of kids laughing in the background. I told them about Maria, about her note. Gently, if you can. Firmly, if you must. I never mentioned Emily by name, but somehow the camera caught the grief anyway. When the reporter asked, "What do you hope people learn from this?" I said, "That family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's whoever saves you a seat when you think there's none left." That evening, the crew left. The hall emptied slowly until it was just me and Ruth, stacking chairs. That's when I heard the sound of heels on the tile. I turned. Emily stood in the doorway, eyes red but steady. She'd been watching the whole thing from the back. "I saw the filming," she said. "They said Mom's name on camera." "She earned it," I said. "I know. I just didn't realize how much of her I forgot trying to be someone else." She took a deep breath, then handed me an envelope. "Divorce papers," she said. I signed them. "He's leaving town. The auditors found what you warned me about. Forged signatures, phantom accounts. They're investigating him for fraud." "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm not," she whispered. "I thought I'd feel ruined, but I feel lighter." We stood there in the empty hall. I could hear the buzz of the vending machine, the soft whistle of heat pipes. She looked at the banner above the stage, "Everyone eats." "Do you need help tomorrow?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "There's always a seat." The next morning, she showed up in jeans and an apron that hung loose on her frame. She didn't try to lead, didn't try to explain herself to anyone. She just served coffee, refilled plates, wiped tables. The volunteers didn't know who she was, and I didn't tell them. Let her earn her place quietly. Halfway through, I caught her laughing with one of the elderly men as he told her about his granddaughter. It wasn't forced. It was soft and real. I thought Maria would have liked that sound. By afternoon, people were lining up outside the church. Word had spread faster than anyone expected. We ran out of chairs, so some folks stood, eating from their laps, smiling anyway. Ruth climbed on a small stage to thank the donors, but before she could finish, someone called my name. I froze. The reporter had returned with a cameraman, uninvited but not unwelcome. He asked if we'd mind filming a follow-up, maybe a short clip for the segment. I nodded. He turned to the crowd. "Would anyone like to share what this means to you?" A hand went up. Emily's. I hadn't expected that. She stepped onto the little stage, clutching the microphone like it was the only solid thing in the room. Her voice trembled at first. "I'm not sure what I deserve to say here," she began. "But I'm the daughter of the woman whose name is on that banner, and of the man who built the table under it." She glanced at me. I forgot what either of those things meant until now. The room went quiet. Even the kitchen stopped clattering. "We talk about gratitude every Thanksgiving," she said. "But we don't talk about humility. We don't talk about how easy it is to think love is owed instead of earned. I did that. And I'm sorry." A woman near the front clapped once softly. Then another joined, and another. Soon the room filled with the sound of hands, not loud applause, just warmth. Emily lowered the mic, eyes wet. She stepped off the stage and walked to me. "You didn't have to forgive me," she said. "I didn't," I answered. "I just stopped holding the grudge hostage." The cameraman caught that line, and for once I didn't mind. It was true. When the news piece aired the following Sunday, it lasted 4 minutes. The anchor called it the quiet Thanksgiving revolution. They showed shots of laughter, of plates, of Maria's name stitched onto a tablecloth, and for 5 seconds, they showed Emily and me side by side, serving food to a woman in a worn coat. There was no caption, no family label, just 2 people handing someone a meal. That night, my phone buzzed nonstop. Old friends, neighbors, people from years back. They didn't talk about betrayal. They talked about peace, about grace, about second chances. Some said they cried. I didn't. I just sat on the couch, the TV glow fading, and whispered thanks to a woman who wasn't there to hear it. A week later, an envelope arrived addressed to Maria's Table, C.O. Dennis Flores. Inside was a single page from the state attorney's office. Notice of pending charges against Matthew R. Jenkins for fraud and falsified documents. Attached was a note from Lila. "You won't need to testify unless you choose to. The evidence speaks loud enough." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the box with Maria's note and the old ledger. It was strange how tidy justice could look on paper. A few paragraphs, a few signatures, the quiet correction of years of noise. That evening, I walked outside. The air had that faint metallic chill of early winter. Across the street, kids were hanging Christmas lights, their laughter bouncing off the siding. My porch light finally worked again. I stood under it and thought about everything that had led here. The text, the exclusion, the ledger, the fund, the dinner, the apology. All the noise reduced to one truth. Silence, when chosen, can rebuild what shouting destroyed. Inside, the phone rang once more. I let it go to voicemail. The machine clicked, and Emily's voice filled the room. "Hey, Dad, they asked me to help plan the Christmas dinner at the church. I said yes. Thought you'd want to know. I'll save us 2 seats." I smiled. A quiet smile meant only for the empty room. The kind of smile that belongs to peace finally earned. Justice hadn't shouted. It had sat down, folded its hands, and waited until everyone was ready to eat. 2 weeks later, the snow arrived. Not a blizzard, just a slow, steady sift of white that made the world look softer than it deserved to. I woke to silence, the kind that comes after everything loud has burned itself out. The house felt different now. It smelled of coffee and cedar instead of loneliness. The air hummed with quiet movement, not absence. I made breakfast, sat at the table, and looked at the envelope box I kept beside the window. It had grown heavier. Letters from donors, thank you notes from seniors, receipts from grocery cards. Proof that something good had taken root. Proof that even broken things can bloom if you stop digging up their roots to check whether they're alive. At 9, Ruth called. "We're setting up early for the Christmas meal," she said. "Can you and Emily come by?" "Of course," I said. "She's already here," Ruth added, her voice soft. "She brought flowers for the tables, said her mom used to do that." When I arrived, the fellowship hall looked brighter than usual. Garlands ran across the ceiling, steam rose from pots on the stoves, and near the center table stood Emily, arranging carnations in old mason jars. She looked up when I walked in and smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't ask for forgiveness, because it's already been given. "I found Mom's recipe cards," she said. "Thought we could use them." She handed me a small stack of worn index cards, edges yellowed and stained with time. Maria's handwriting looped across them in faded blue ink. Stuffing, sweet potato pie, cranberry relish. Her voice on paper. I traced the ink with my finger, feeling the ghost of her hand. "Perfect," I said quietly. As volunteers filed in, the room filled with the sounds of chopping, laughter, the rhythm of people working toward the same end. Emily moved between tables with quiet ease, showing an older woman how to fold napkins, helping a child stir gravy. She wasn't trying to lead. She was just there, present, real. Around noon, Lila dropped by with forms for the fund's next phase, an expansion to cover New Year's programs. "You've built something solid," she said, smiling. "Maria would be proud." I nodded. "She already knows." Lila hesitated before leaving. "And Emily?" "She's learning pride and peace can share a table," I said. "That's enough." As the meal began, people crowded the hall until every chair was filled. Some of them had been here before. Some were new, drawn by the story they'd seen online. There were businessmen sitting beside bus drivers, widows beside students. No one asked who was feeding whom. They just passed plates. Near the end of the meal, Ruth clinked a spoon against a glass. "Before we finish," she said, "I think someone here deserves a word." She gestured toward me. I shook my head, but she wouldn't have it. The room quieted. I stood, feeling 100 eyes waiting. "I don't have much to say," I began. "Just this. Thanksgiving started as a day for gratitude, and somewhere along the way I forgot what that meant. Gratitude isn't about getting invited. It's about showing up anyway, with something to give." I paused, glanced at Emily. "This table isn't mine. It isn't the church's. It's Maria's. And it's yours. All of you. Because no one eats alone here." The applause came gently, like rain against windows. When it faded, Emily rose and hugged me. Not the quick, careful kind we used to share. This one lingered, strong and certain. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up when I did." "Families do that sometimes," I said. "One person holds the light until the other remembers the way back." After lunch, we stayed behind to clean. I watched her wipe tables, humming the same tune her mother used to hum while cooking. The sound filled the emptying hall like a quiet benediction. When we finished, I handed her Maria's letter, the one from the wooden box. "She wrote this for you," I said. "I think it's time." Emily unfolded the note, eyes tracing every word. When she reached the last line, "Firmly if you must," her lips trembled. "She knew," she whispered. "She always did." We locked up and walked outside together. The snow had thickened, falling slow and soundless, catching in her hair. She looked at me and smiled. "Do you think she'd be happy?" "I think she's here," I said. "And she's laughing at how long it took us to figure it out." That night I returned home and turned off the lights, leaving only the glow from the porch. I poured a glass of whiskey and sat by the window, watching snow cover the yard. My phone buzzed. A message from Emily. A photo of the fellowship hall. Lights still on. People still talking even after closing time. Beneath it, she'd written, "I understand now. You were never teaching me to obey. You were teaching me to see." I set the phone down and let the words settle. For years, I'd mistaken peace for silence. But peace has a sound after all. The murmur of forgiveness, the low hum of people breaking bread without judgment. I raised my glass toward the empty chair across from me. "We did it, Maria," I said softly, gently, after all. The snow kept falling, erasing footprints, softening edges, making the world look new again. Christmas came quiet that year. No grand dinners, no glittering lights across the neighborhood, no noise pretending to be love. Just snow, steady and soft, falling like forgiveness over everything that had once felt sharp. The house smelled of cinnamon and pine. Emily had brought over a small tree last week. Nothing fancy, just a few old ornaments and the same crooked tinfoil star Maria made decades ago. It leaned to the left like it always had, defying perfection, surviving time. That star had seen every version of us, whole, broken, and now rebuilding. She arrived just after sunrise, carrying 2 grocery bags and that same uncertain smile she used to wear when she was little and afraid she'd done something wrong. "I figured we'd cook something simple," she said. "No turkey this time. Maybe Mom's soup." "Perfect," I said. We cooked quietly. No small talk, no forced laughter, just the sounds of knives on cutting boards, spoons clinking against pots, the slow rhythm of 2 people relearning each other's presence. She chopped the carrots the same way Maria did, thin, even, patient. Every small movement felt like memory returning home. When the soup was ready, we sat across from each other at the table. Steam curled between us, carrying the scent of time and old love. We ate without hurry, each spoonful warm in ways words couldn't reach. After a while, she said, "I was thinking, maybe next year, we invite a few people from Maria's table, the ones who don't have anyone. I want this house to feel like it used to." I looked up from my bowl. "That's what your mother always wanted," I said. Emily smiled faintly. "I think I finally understand her." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. "It's not much," she said. "Just something I wanted to do myself." Inside was a check, 1 month's salary made out to Maria's table fund. "It's not repayment," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "It's gratitude." I set the envelope down carefully. "You've already paid the only debt that mattered," I said. "You came home." Later that afternoon, we drove to the church. The hall was filled with noise and light, volunteers wrapping boxes, children running between tables, the hum of community that never needed perfection to be holy. Ruth hugged Emily as if they'd known each other for years. No judgment, no introductions, just warmth. When we handed over the donation, Ruth smiled. "You 2 look alike when you stand next to each other," she said. Emily laughed softly. "I guess I finally see it too." On the way home, the sky turned gold and low, that winter kind of light that makes everything look more honest. Snow began to fall again, brushing against the windshield like a whisper. When we reached the house, she lingered at the door, holding her gloves in her hands. "Merry Christmas, Dad," she said. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." She hesitated for just a heartbeat, then stepped forward and hugged me. Not the careful hug of guilt or apology, but something whole, something real. After she left, I sat by the window and watched her car disappear into the snowfall. The road vanished behind her almost instantly, as if the world itself was giving her a clean slate. I poured a cup of coffee and opened Maria's letter one last time. The ink had faded, the paper soft from the years, but the words still held steady. "Gently, if you can. Firmly, if you must." I smiled. I'd done both, and in the end, love had survived it. Outside, the world was quiet again. The light from the tree shimmered against the window. The crooked star at the top glowed faintly in the reflection, and for a second, I could almost see her, Maria, standing just behind it, nodding like a teacher watching her students finally understand the lesson. This wasn't revenge. It never was. It was restoration. It was the quiet miracle that comes after truth, the peace that doesn't need to shout to be heard. I raised my cup toward the empty chair across from me. "We did it," I whispered. "Together." And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full. Full of warmth, full of memory, full of forgiveness that no longer hurt to hold. Because in the end, Justice didn't roar. It whispered. It healed. It sat down at the same table it once left and said, "There's still room for you here." Do you believe that forgiveness and rebuilding family bonds after our children realize their mistakes is truly important? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Share your perspective in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next powerful story that will touch your heart.